Hello, everyone, and welcome to our program. My name is Joy Yamaguchi. I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at the Japanese American National Museum, and on behalf of JANM and Little Tokyo Historical Society, I'm so grateful that you all took the time to join us here today. Just wanted to start with a few logistical notes. We will be running this program for an hour and a half, and if you have any questions, you can leave them in the chat on the YouTube page. You will need a YouTube account to do that, so you can just sign up through YouTube and then ask any questions that you may have for any of our speakers. If at any point you have a question for them, you can leave them right there in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. I also wanted to say that this program will remain on YouTube after the fact, and we will add subtitles in so you can access it more broadly. And then on behalf of JANM, I wanted to say thank you for coming to this part of our JANM at Home initiative. Because we can't be gathered in person right now, we are doing a lot of this digital programming, gathering with people virtually. So we're offering things like virtual tours, which just launched, programs like this, workshops, and all sorts of behind-the-scenes content. So we really hope that you continue to join us, and if you enjoy what you saw today, consider supporting the museum. And if you like what you saw today, you can see the social media links on the screen right now. Please let us know. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I am going to pass it off to our MC. I am really honored to welcome TV actor Alimi Ballard as our MC today. You've probably seen him on Ava DuVernay's Queen Sugar and in reoccurring roles on programs like NCIS, NCIS LA, CSI, and Numbers. He is currently a regular on Queen of the South on USA, and so right now I'm gonna welcome him on screen. Go ahead, take it away.
All right, we're all set. As I was so kindly introduced, my name is Alimi Ballard, and I'm an actor, and I'm here to help navigate us through this beautiful experience. And if you will allow me, I'm just going to jump right on in, okay? And I'm gonna set the scene. So March 1946, in a smoke-filled room at the Jazz Finale Club, two of America's jazz greats, Miles Davis and Charlie Parker, strolled on stage and made jazz history in Bronzeville, Little Tokyo. Today, we welcome you to Charlie Parker and Miles Davis at the Finale Club in Bronzeville, Little Tokyo. Today's celebration will be a tasty mix of music, memories, videos, and visuals. Now, during World War II, when Japanese Americans were forced from their homes and detained in concentration camps, Little Tokyo was left empty. And Black workers were migrating from the South seeking wartime jobs. They moved into Little Tokyo, which was one of the few areas with no restrictive housing covenants. And that's a very nice way to say I didn't have any racial housing restrictive policies. These people opened restaurants, hotels, churches, breakfast clubs, and Bronzeville was born. Last year, the Little Tokyo Historical Society won a city council motion to install a historic marker at the actual site of the Finale Club in Bronzeville, Little Tokyo, on East First Street. Now, filmmaker Steve Nagano captures the plaque, which stands as a symbol of the shared history between the African American and the Japanese American communities. Please enjoy the video.
My name is Steve Nagano, and I'm at 230.5 East First Street. It was here that a jazz club called The Finale was once home to a performance by jazz greats Charlie Parker and Miles Davis. This happened on March of 1946. We, at the Little Tokyo Historical Society, worked with the city of Los Angeles to get this permanent sign installed, to commemorate the location of this historic jazz club that existed when Little Tokyo was Bronzeville.
Thank you so much, Steve, for that beautiful video. Now, 74 years later, this historical plaque memorializes the Finale Club, Miles Davis and Charlie Parker, and Brownsville, Little Tokyo. You can see it at 230 and a half East 1st Street. Now, the top musicians from the vibrant Central Avenue jazz scene wanted places where they could jam after hours, after the clubs had closed. All-night breakfast clubs sprang up in Bronzeville. Now, jazz musicians flocked down, followed by the late-night jazz aficionados from all over Los Angeles. The Finale Club opened in the fall of 1944. Jazz keyboardist Ron Kobayashi and his band will start us off with Bebop Dad. Now, Ron has been making music for 30 years. He's performed with Mel Torme, Kenny Burrell, Peter Frampton, Tom Scott, and Peter White. But his first and main love is jazz. Today, Ron and his band will perform Charlie Parker and Miles Davis inspired pieces that he composed, especially for our Finale Club program. Ladies and gentlemen, please get ready. Please welcome Ron Kobayashi and his band.
Yeah. Well, we're going to play some jazz influenced by Charlie Parker today. My name is Ron Kobayashi. I'm a pianist. I'm from Orange County. And Charlie Parker means so much to all of us because Charlie Parker is really one of the great innovators of American music. Brought the level of jazz improvisation and composition up to such a high level, rhythmically, melodically, and harmonically, that it really has not gone further than that for the most part in jazz. So we're honored to be able to honor him today. This is a tune I wrote called Bebop Dad. Ready? 1, 2, 1, 2, 2.
Whoa. I think I'm back on. That was amazing. A round of applause for Ron Kobayashi and his band. Wherever you are, just clap. You give it a couple of seconds, just clap. That was amazing, Ron. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm gonna get to the script, but I found jazz, like a lot of young people around that college age, and Miles Davis especially, and it completely changed my life. So, but back to the script. Okay, thank you so much, Ron, and let's hear it for the Ron Kobayashi Band. Now, we're going to welcome our first speaker, noted Bronzeville scholar, Dr. Hilary Jenks, who will take us on a journey back in time. When Hilary wrote her dissertation on Little Tokyo, she began wondering what happened when Japanese Americans came back from camp and to what was now Bronzeville. She looked at how the Japanese and the African Americans handled this transition, and what was the process of how two communities so deeply marginalized and mistreated in this country were able to construct a mutual space, and found many lessons for how race and racism have shaped our country. Now, a little bit about Hilary. Hilary received her PhD in American Studies and Ethnicity from USC in 2008. Her dissertation, Bronzeville, Little Tokyo, and the Unstable Geography of Race in Post-World War II Los Angeles, was published in the Southern California Quarterly in 2011. Please welcome the accomplished Dr. Hilary Jenks.
Okay. Thank you so much, Alimi. Just also want to give a quick shout out to Joy for the technical support, the Ron Kobayashi Band for the terrific music, and especially to the irrepressible Mia Iwataki for involving me in this wonderful commemoration of an important moment in the history of Little Tokyo and of Los Angeles. Also want to give thanks to the other scholars and writers who brought me in to the story of Bronzeville through their passion for it. Carrie Ann Yokota, Martha Nakagawa especially, and R.J. Smith and Kathy Foley-Meyer. So I get to do the fun photo part of our afternoon together. So I was asked today to set the stage on how Bronzeville came into being. So I'm going to go back a little farther in time than the moment Alimi was referring to, because I think it's important to say a little something about how Little Tokyo came into being in order to even understand like what occurred when it became Bronzeville. So going way, way back, there was a Tongva settlement not far from First and Central in the area that we now know as Little Tokyo. But following Spanish conquest, missionization, and then the American takeover of California, the neighborhood we now know as Little Tokyo by the late 19th century was mostly not Little Tokyo. It had German breweries, it had Irish saloons, Jewish secondhand shops, Chinese laundries, and it also had the homes and businesses of Black pioneers like midwife Biddy Mason and stable owner Robert Owens, before African Americans spread west and south along Central Avenue. So Little Tokyo was actually Black before it was Bronzeville. Now, the Japanese business and residential presence is dated to the mid-1880s. And by 1905, Anglos in LA had started to refer to the area as Little Tokyo. So that's kind of when we can say there was starting to be this concentration of businesses. And by the early 1920s, it was the established social and commercial center of Issei and Nisei, so immigrant and first generation communities who fished, farmed, and sold plants and produce all across LA County. Yet this inscription as a Japanese American space obscured considerable and continuing diversity, right? It's not ever just a Japanese neighborhood, even though it's called Little Tokyo. So Koyashi Uono wrote in 1928 that, this is just, I want to pause for a second with this photo. If you're familiar with Little Tokyo, you will recognize the Koban right there on the far left, over 100 years ago. So in 1928, Koyashi Uono wrote this master's thesis, actually, in which he was looking at this neighborhood. And he said, fully 1/3 of the hotels and rooming houses in the district are still entirely for white laborers. And in the 1940 census, the tracts encompassing Little Tokyo showed a Japanese population living in the neighborhood that was somewhere between like 29 and 36%. So it's about a third residentially Japanese. And then there's substantial numbers of white, Black, and Spanish surname residents as well. So it's kind of a tradition, and Bronzeville continues that tradition of multiple communities negotiating this shared space of Little Tokyo, despite language differences, job competition, and racial discrimination. But I think what I want to highlight that really sort of sets the story of Little Tokyo, Bronzeville, makes it stand out, is the degree of state intervention in the process by which, one neighborhood was replaced by another neighborhood. So I'm going to fast forward a bit in time. Following the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, and then President Roosevelt's approval of Executive Order 9066, mandatory evacuations of all ethnic Japanese in LA County, immigrant and citizen alike, began in April 1942. So you can see there's sort of a fire sale of inventory happening here. People only had about 2 weeks max to clear out. And so you suddenly went from this very busy, sort of dense retail neighborhood to just empty streets, right? It was sort of both eerily empty, but also still seen as somehow un-American. This is a film that was released in 1942, Little Tokyo, USA. There's an article in the LA Times around the same moment that describes Little Tokyo as, quote, a city within a city used exclusively by Nipponese, which honest American citizens viewed with large and disturbing questions in their minds. Now, what I really find interesting is this is a photo that accompanied that LA Times article. And you can see that it says, se habla español across the bottom. So if it's used exclusively by Nipponese, I don't know why anyone needs to se habla español. So it gives the lie to these claims that were being circulated at the time. But the property owners in the neighborhood were very concerned because they weren't having any rents coming in. And the property owners, this is another common misconception, are not Japanese, because California had an alien land law that said aliens ineligible to citizenship cannot own land. And Japanese immigrants were not eligible to become citizens because of their race. So most of the buildings in Little Tokyo are actually owned by mostly white people. And what that meant was that they were still there and they still had, bills to pay and no rent coming in. So they were trying to find ways to de-Japanify Little Tokyo. So they were taking all the kanji out of the windows. They renamed the Miyako Hotel to the Civic Hotel, right? These are the kinds of actions that they were doing. And for several months, it wasn't really working to the extent that then Mayor Fletcher Bowron was trying to figure out what to do. He's right there in City Hall. Little Tokyo is right on his doorstep. And he said, maybe we can use it for storage. And then they get a little bit of rent for using the buildings for storage. And as an aside, I'm sure Steve Nagano is on here somewhere. So yes, let's get Mayor Bowron's name off that square, Steve. So what nobody foresaw in this moment in 1942 was that the demographics of LA were about to change dramatically and rapidly. And that was because of the large numbers of African Americans who were coming to the city to take advantage of new employment opportunities in the shipbuilding plants and the aircraft plants. And this was because of Executive Order 8802, which stated that there could no longer be discrimination in hiring in defense manufacturing plants. So for the first time, African Americans could get good industrial jobs. By mid-1943, an average of 5,500 African Americans were arriving in the city every single month. And at this point in time, 90% of the existing housing stock in the city of Los Angeles was covered by restrictive housing covenants. This is a statement in the deed that says no Negro can occupy a building. And this meant that these thousands of folks coming into LA had very few options where they could live. Mostly they were directed into the existing Black neighborhoods along Central Avenue and in West Adams. And those obviously quickly became overcrowded. It's also important to note that there was a lot of new housing built for war workers in LA during that time period. There's 51,000 housing units constructed in the 3 years between January 1st, 1942, January 1st, 1945. And of those 51,000 housing units, only 942 units were open to Black residents to occupy. That's under 2%. Did not address the housing crisis for Black Angelenos at all. So what that means is Little Tokyo is just about the only available and unrestricted space that is left. And that is how Bronzeville was born. So given the magnitude of this influx, Bronzeville pretty quickly became overcrowded as well. In an area where maybe as few as 7,500 Japanese Americans, maybe 20,000 people total, were living prior to evacuation. 30,000 people were living there in 1944, and some estimates eventually climbed as high as 80,000 people. Bronzeville exemplified the wartime paradox that Black Angelenos struggled with. Josh Sides has called it the prosperous ghetto. So new employment opportunities and wage scales finally open up, but at the same time, Black neighborhoods and institutions are suffering from the stress of trying to house so many newcomers under these segregated circumstances. A 1943 survey found more than 55% of Bronzeville's residents living in overcrowded conditions, with situations where 5 people lived in a room with only a skylight for ventilation, 30 people were sharing one bath, 40 people sharing one toilet. And Bronzeville's residents were neither unaware of nor indifferent to the conditions in which they were forced to live. Several expressed a desire to move further out or live anywhere but here, but so far had been unable to find better housing where Black folks were allowed to live. Bronzeville was crowded not only physically but spiritually. I always think of it as a very haunted space. Specters of the building's previous occupants, not dead, but sent away by unseen powers, filled up the compressed space between the new residents. Nevertheless, Bronzeville offered African Americans fresh opportunities for entrepreneurship and cultural expression, and was a key space for newcomers trying to make a home out of their new and not very welcoming city. The name itself, Bronzeville, was apparently applied by entrepreneur Leonard Christmas, which he borrowed from the famous, was a nickname for the South Side of Chicago. And in November 1943, he got together with 3 other gentlemen and he started the Bronzeville Chamber of Commerce. And they distributed these cards to the neighbors' new businesses that said, "This is Bronzeville, watch us grow." And grow it did. The chamber eventually had 125 members, sponsoring a 1943 Halloween party that was attended by 800 residents, and also a Miss Bronzeville beauty pageant. A Baptist church had moved into the sanctuary of the Nishi Honganji Temple, and Pilgrim House, a social services center under the leadership of Reverend Harold Kingsley, took up residence in what had been the Japanese Union Church on San Pedro, which is now Judge John Izo Street. There are similar communities that grew up in the evacuated Japan towns of other West Coast cities, including in San Francisco. And I think that's also important to note that the story of LA's Bronzeville, it's not just LA that it happened. Some of the neighborhood's greatest business successes, its restaurants, its nightclubs, its breakfast clubs, were also its greatest cultural venues, linking Bronzeville to national developments in African American music. This is a picture of Gordon Shepard, who was the owner of Shep's Playhouse, one of the major nightclubs in Bronzeville that I'm pretty sure Kirk will be mentioning. He was a cameraman in Hollywood on Black films. And he's in this picture here with Joe Louis, the famous boxer, in his club. There's also so many other places, Chef's Playhouse, but also the Cobra Club, the Creole Palace, Club Rendezvous, and of course the Finale Club, which I will say no more about that because I'm going to let Kirk wax eloquent on that. But one last thing I do want to say about Bronzeville is that despite the assured declarations of Leonard Christmas and the successes of these nightclub operators like Gordon Shepard, Bronzeville remained a very tenuous place for Black Angelenos. And this is particularly, again, because the ownership of the buildings remained largely with Anglos. So even in the clubs, which are these places most representative of Black economic achievement, sometimes the image of success was false. So the Cobra Club, for example, the lease was actually owned by two Jewish gentlemen, Paul Mirabelle and Saul Goldberg. But they hired a Black entertainer named Eddie Griffin to be the host. So he's the public face for the club. And people assumed it was his club or he was the owner, but that wasn't actually true. He wasn't the one making the money off the club. So to sum up the contradictions of Bronzeville, I turn to R.J. Smith's brilliant book, The Great Black Way. I so recommend reading it if you're not yet familiar with it. He said, federal decree wiped a choice center square of the map clean. Nobody around knew who owned a given building. Nobody knew who was responsible for controlling the streets. It was somebody else's land. The moment was all Bronzeville had. I think on that note, it's time for a little more jazz.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Miss Hillary Jenks. That was educational, and I'm sitting here and stunned. I was supposed to speak. I'm like, "Where's my script?" But that was so amazing. Thank you for the education and for the information. And I'm going to help to move it along. Today, Hillary is the director of Grad Success, a suite of academic, social, and professional development programs for graduate professional students and postdocs at the University of California, Irvine. And I am sure you are rocking the house over there. Now, I see a special note on my little page here. I'm going to read it. Hopefully it's going to coordinate with some visuals. If it doesn't, I apologize. Blame me. I know I'm doing it wrong. But mixologists Edgardo and Vanessa Hernandez were really excited to learn about Bronzeville, Little Tokyo, and our celebration today. And hearing about the history in the music of Miles Davis and Charlie Parker and the Finale Club inspired them to create the Finale Club signature cocktail just for us to enjoy this afternoon. So on the screen, you're supposed to be seeing the picture of the cocktail and its ingredients. Maybe you are, maybe you're not, but I'm sure Joy is going to work that in there, our technical coordinator, before the event is over. Oh, there it is. Finale Club signature drink. Boom! All right. Now, let me get your groove on again. Miles Davis and Charlie Parker, a.k.a. Yardbird, the Bird, Charlie Bird Parker, were two of the most influential figures in jazz history, period. Bird was a sax virtuoso and composer who introduced revolutionary harmonic ideas to jazz. He and Dizzy Gillespie, were developing an improvisational new style of jazz called bebop as early as 1939. The music was fast, it was intellectual, complicated, abstract, and at times dissonant. Now, our next musical number, Stay at Home Blues, was inspired by Charlie Parker and features Joshua Childress on sax. Please enjoy.
Hi, my name is Joshua Christian Childress. I'm from LA County, Torrance. And the thing about the Bird was that he was really ahead of his time. He not only innovated music, but he also innovated saxophone playing. And saxophone playing everyone was so used to hearing this certain sound, and then he came along and he just introduced this new music, and saxophone players were able to express themselves in a much more freer way. And that's what inspired me to play jazz and play saxophone, because it was a way of expressing myself the best. So we're playing Stay at Home Blues, written by Ron Kobayashi, and hope you guys enjoy.
All right. I think that's me. How you guys doing? That was amazing. Thank you so much. The Ron Kobayashi Band. These pieces were composed for today's event, and they're tremendous. How you guys enjoying yourselves? Are you enjoying the music? I'm getting flashbacks to all the old tunes, man. This is like around the early 90s. I like completely fell into jazz. I even did a playing Miles Davis when I was a kid on a dare, and it changed my life. I had to read the whole autobiography, and it was transformative and educational. I learned, all the things you don't know that you don't know. Okay, now it's time to refresh your Finale Club signature cocktail while we welcome Kirk Silsbee. Now, Kirk is a journalist who's been writing about jazz and culture for over 40 years. You may have seen his work on Variety, Downbeat, Mojo, and the LA Times. He writes essays for jazz and blues releases, including comprehensive albums on Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, Ella Fitzgerald, Joe Pass, and Clifford Brown. He's appeared in jazz documentaries on Teddy Edwards, The Lighthouse, Frank Morgan, and the Finale Club. Kirk's expertise in the Los Angeles jazz history, that's where his expertise lies, with a special interest in Central Avenue and Bronzeville, which he will share with us today. Please welcome the acclaimed Kirk Silsbee.
As R.J. Smith makes clear in his great book, The Great Black Way, which Hillary referenced a couple of minutes ago, he makes the point that Bronzeville was like the Wild West. It had very little civic, legal, even law enforcement oversight. It was a wild area, untamed. People were pouring into it, finding space to live as best they could, utilizing the spaces for their own commercial business needs, and things just sprung up overnight. The Finale Club was one of those endeavors. First reference I can find to it is from December of 1944, when a guy named Taylor Cooper from Detroit opened the Finale Club with an event ostensibly to raise money for a playground in Bronzeville, using entertainers and the promise of war bonds held in a drawing to bring people out. What it was actually was a gambling den, and it was quickly closed up. And the powers that be told him, look, Jack, we're 3 blocks away from City Hall. Don't be trying to open a gambling club. The Finale was taken over by a guy named Nat Jaffe, who had the drugstore Civic Drugs just below the Civic Hotel at First and San Pedro. Under his aegis, he brought in the dancer Foster Johnson to oversee some entertainment. Foster had a long history in and around jazz. He was a great tap dancer, and he knew a lot of people in show business. He ran into Charlie Parker at a bar on Hollywood Boulevard. Parker had stayed behind in Los Angeles after the Dizzy Gillespie Band flew back to New York following their Billy Berg's engagement. Instead of going back to New York, Parker cashed in his ticket and just roamed the streets of Central Avenue and the Central Avenue district, looking for a place to play, looking for a little money, looking for heroin. And his time after the Billy Berg's engagement in Los Angeles was nothing less than a nightmare. He literally lived from hand to mouth, but he was still trying to find a place to play. It was a sport among the knowledgeable jazz fans and musicians in Los Angeles to find out where Parker was playing that particular night and then to go see him. It was like shooting in the dark, and it was all based on rumor. What have you heard? Where's Charlie playing tonight? Where's Charlie? We haven't seen him. That's what his life was like. Heroin was very hard to get in Los Angeles at that time. He unfortunately had to rely most of the time on an opium derivative that looked and smelled like its street name, mud. Between the heroin and cheap wine, that's how he was staying alive. But he had friends in the music committee. Errol Garner had come in from New York. They knew each other from the 52nd Street days. Errol was getting work in Hollywood with his trio. He invited Charlie to come along. That was good for Parker, to be able to pick up a few nights' work with the Errol Garner trio. When Parker met Foster Johnson, he said, "Why don't you come over to the Finale Club? That'll be good for you." Sometimes Errol Garner brought the trio over, but eventually Parker put together a band, coalesced around the people who were in town. Young Miles Davis, one recording session to his name back in New York. On the strength of hearing that Charlie Parker was in Los Angeles, took a job with the Benny Carter Orchestra just to come to LA to be around Parker. He quickly found him, and as Parker was getting things together at the Finale, Miles was his logical choice for a trumpeter. Errol had bigger fish to fry. He had actual club work, so he didn't need to be playing at an after-hours place known only to musicians in Bronzeville. Parker found pianist Joe Albany, and Joe had the requisite bebop knowledge and skills to play. Art Farmer's twin brother, Addison, was an able bass player, and a young drummer named Chuck Thompson filled out the band. The word quickly spread among musicians that Charlie Parker had a residence. And in the next 3 months, musicians from anywhere west of the Rockies came to find their way to the Finale Club. Musicians from the orchestras of Stan Kenton, Woody Herman, Boyd Rayburn, and even dance bands like Les Brown. They all found their way to the Finale. Stan Getz, Jerry Mulligan, Red Rodney, and then locals like Sonny Chris and Teddy Edwards, Howard McGee, who had relocated to Los Angeles, Cecil McNeely, before they called him Big J McNeely, Gerald Wilson, Clora Bryant. All the black jazz musicians who were in town found their way to the Finale to hear what Charlie Parker was doing. The young modernists in all the visiting orchestras, they made it a pilgrimage. But the Finale was also an outgrowth of Central Avenue, which was Hollywood's playground. So it was no surprise to see somebody like Judy Garland or Sonny Tufts or any number of Hollywood faces show up at the Finale. The music started at midnight. Foster Johnson had arranged for nightly broadcasts over station KPAS coming out of Pasadena. He handled the broadcasting chores, and he would MC the music and the entertainers that he could cobble together to perform. And then he would take his own cut and dance to the rhythm section. Foster was a cutting edge tap dancer. And even though he and Charlie Parker didn't share the stage together, their work was complementary. And someone as intuitive and intelligent as Charlie Parker undoubtedly was watching Foster Johnson, taking rhythmic cues from him and working that into his music. This band worked for a couple of months, and then something happened. The police were an intermittent presence in Bronzeville. One of the beat cops was a young patrolman named Thomas Bradley, former track star and future mayor of Los Angeles. Foster told me that a couple of police detectives came in one night and they wanted a payoff. There was also the added intrigue that one of the women around the club was somebody that they were interested in, and she didn't return their interest. So the next night when Foster came to work, there was a padlock on the door. The room shut down, but in less than a month, it had opened back up again. Howard McGee, the trumpet player, had found Parker, who had disappeared after the closing, opened the club back up, built a band around him with tenor saxophonist Teddy Edwards and Gene Montgomery, alto saxophonist Sonny Chris, pianist Earl Eklund, bassist Bob Kesterson, and drummer Roy Porter, with Howard leading the band. Now, this was a second life for the Finale Club, and a second life, if you will, for Charlie Parker. The music drew a lot of people, and it was very vibrant. Howard tried to get every record company in town to come down, hear the band, and record them. No one was interested. And Los Angeles in that town at that time was a plethora of new independent record labels. They were springing up on a weekly basis. Everybody thought they could get into the record business and get a big hit, something like Slim Gaillard's Cement Mixer that was going to bring them a lot of money. So virtually anyone could record in Los Angeles, but nobody was interested in recording the Howard McGee Band with Charlie Parker. To complicate things further, Parker's health was just deteriorating by the day. He never found a reliable source of heroin in Los Angeles, and he was coming apart at the seams. That didn't mean that he couldn't play brilliantly. One night, a couple got up and asked to hear The Gypsy, which was a new hit record by the Ink Spots. The hipsters looked at each other on the stand and said, "That corny tune, who wants to play that?" But Charlie Parker got up and he called the chords to the pianist, and he played The Gypsy because he knew it. And on that night, The Gypsy entered the jazz lexicon. Parker was coming apart, Sometimes he couldn't hold his horn up. Sometimes he couldn't get a sound out of it. Ross Russell, who was recording him for Dial Records, knew that the opportunity to record was getting very, very slim. He got him in the studio, got 2 titles out of him, Loverman and The Gypsy. And the next day, Charlie Parker was carted off to Camarillo, where he spent 6 months in a mental hospital. And he didn't get out till January of 1947. And that's the story of the Finale Club.
Kirk, that was amazing. Thank you so much for the education and for the information. So brilliantly informative. I think there will be some questions later on, but I think we're going to introduce Chicho's art video next. And I think Joy is going to put that on. So I'm going to throw it to Joy and see if we can get that video going. Thank you guys for being here. Really amazing.
What is this piece about?
I'm a big fan of jazz music, and I was fascinated to learn that many of my favorite musicians played in Little Tokyo when it was Bronzeville. I drew a map of Little Tokyo with adhesive tape overlaid on Charlie Parker's face.
Hi, my name is Robert Shoji. It's my great pleasure to introduce our next guest into this live stream. His name is Erin Davis, and he is the youngest son of the great Miles Davis. Hey, Erin, how you doing today?
I'm really good, Robert. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, sure.
Can we start by telling us how you and your family are keeping your father's legacy alive?
Sure. We run the day-to-day business of Miles Davis, which is licensing requests for whether it's for compilation records or for film and TV syncs. We've got musical projects that we're always working on with Sony and Warner Brothers and Universal and Prestige. And then we promoted the documentary last year. We did that all year. It was great. We did the film 4 years ago. So those are the kind of things we deal with day to day, like year to year, day to day. It's really the greatest job, though. It really is, because I get to, when we can travel, I get to travel. I get to do stuff like this, and you learn so much. You learn about Miles in the 40s coming to LA and playing at the Finale Club and dealing with that, whole thing. So, and I loved your film. It was great. It was really great. A lot of people don't know about the people living in this one area, and then they were all taken away, basically. I mean, with the war and everything, it was that's just really bad. That's just really sad, And then for it to become Bronzeville for a while, it's just kind of like LA history that I didn't really know about. So I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, so I've read that you yourself are a musician, and could you talk a little bit more about what it was like to play with your dad? And I know I've read that you went on a couple of tours with him. Is that true?
Oh yeah, well I went on tours as on the road crew first for years, but when I graduated from high school, he put me in the band as the electronic percussionist, which I didn't have any idea what that was. I was playing drums at the time and a little bit of guitar, but not really good enough to be in his band as a drummer to replace Ricky, and guitar not there. So So he had me playing what he called street sounds, which were like samples of percussion instead of a real percussionist. So I played an octopad, and I did 2 tours. I did a summer tour and a fall tour, and I was like nervous every night. Like I was uncomfortable, and it was probably the best way to learn. Like is just to jump in and swim, and I appreciate that. I don't like hearing some of the recordings back because I just get. It's so funny. I'm almost 50 now, and I still feel like when I was 8. So I was 19 then. So that was like 30 years ago. So I still get those butterflies, and I'm like, man, I don't want to feel like that. So, but I do appreciate that time very much in the band. I always, when I worked on the crew, I kind of dreamed about being in the band. Like I guess I thought I would be the drummer, but but I got to be the electronic percussionist, and that was really great.
So do you remember the moment the moment that he kind of turned to you and said, "Hey, once you actually play in the band"? Do you remember that moment, or was it?
Yeah, I was asking him if he was going to make it. I think to my graduation in Malibu, and he was already on the road, so he couldn't make it. And he goes, "But you're going to come fill in for." He said, "You're going to come take John's place." It was John Bingham, who played in Fishbone. He was actually a guitarist, but he produced a track and wrote a track called Jilly for Miles on the Mandela record, and it had a lot of like cool programming and stuff. So he wanted that sound on the road. So John said, "Yeah, I can do that." So he put an octopad together and got some samples and played along with Ricky as a percussionist. So I filled in for that. And John went to go play with Fishbone. So I didn't have any idea. Like, well, I'm like, I listened to him. I think I had 2 shows to watch John before he left. So I was like, okay, I just tried to do the best I could.
Okay, so my last question is, where can we go to learn more about Miles Davis and any future projects related to his legacy?
Well, the best places are milesdavis.com. Miles Davis Instagram page, Miles Davis Twitter, and then there's like I am not very active in it, but I know that there's a big the Miles Facebook page is very big, and there's also a Miles discussion page which I stay out of, but a lot of people go in there and they discuss things and they want to talk about it, and a lot of critiques about stuff we do, which is fine. I don't mind, but so there's those places to go to.
Okay, so hey, Erin, thanks again for joining us today. We greatly appreciate your participation in this celebration to commemorate your dad and Charlie Parker playing together at the Finale Club in 1946. So again, we really appreciate taking the time.
No problem. I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys. I think it's really cool that you were able to get that dedication for the club.
Hi, my name is Nolan Shaheed. Bebop is a genre that was created by Bird and his contemporaries. One thing about bebop, it's always done very, very fast. He had a young guy named Miles Davis who played with him, that's Charlie Parker. And not only did they influence how fast the music was going to be played, but they influenced how slow and pretty it can be played. So Rod wrote this nice, beautiful tune called Person to Person that shows the ballad playing of bebop.
1, 2, 3, 4.
That was amazing. I have been going on, guys, on the technical difficulties. I thought I was live. I have been screaming about how amazing that was. You have been listening to Person to Person by Ron Kobayashi, inspired by Miles Davis, and featuring Nolan Shaheed on trumpet. And you guys rocked it. Now, Miles Davis, as if you need any more information about him, but here's some. Miles was a jazz trumpeter, band leader, composer. He was an innovator of major stylistic developments in jazz. He started to feel that the complex and the rapid chord changes of bebop didn't allow the improviser to develop an interesting lyrical melody. He began revising the harmonic approach to allow for the development of coherent and lyrical melodic lines, and led jazz into a new direction. Man, that's got to be an understatement. But yes, he led jazz into a new direction. Miles said, "I know what I've done for music, but don't call me a legend. A legend is an old man with a cane known for what he used to do. I'm still doing it." And Miles is still doing it, as his music and his legacy lives on through his son, Erin, who you heard from already, and jazz musicians and historians across the globe. Now, I'd like to invite back Hillary Jenks and Kirk Silsbee for a conversational update on Bronzeville, Little Tokyo, and where the LA jazz scene has moved to. Hillary, Kirk, please.
Hi, thanks, Alimi, so much. I was thinking, as Kurt is coming back on, what I might mention, I'm tech challenge, can't figure out how to log into the YouTube chat, but I'm following it. And first of all, love to everyone, miss you. But also I noticed Kathy Masaoka said, land and ownership continues, like this is a through line in Little Tokyo's history. And yes, it is. And one thing I just wanted to sort of mention in getting us started is I get a lot of questions about like, well, where did Bronzeville go? How did it get erased, right? And people kind of have this image in their head of like, I guess, Japanese Americans came back from camp and I don't know, African Americans just moved out. And that's really not the case. What happened was Parker Center, the former police headquarters. So the city came in and condemned the entire block that was bounded by Main, Los Angeles, First and Temple streets. And that caused the shutdown of a lot of kind of newly reestablished Japanese American businesses. But it also meant 3,000 people got evicted, and 90% of those people were Black. So one of the big reasons Bronzeville went away and kind of like was erased was because they literally bulldozed it. And so that's just one final thing I wanted to highlight in terms of why Bronzeville went away and we don't hear about it, was because they actively removed it. The city did.
I think there was something else going on, Hillary, and that is the war had ended.
Mm-hmm.
People had entirely uprooted their lives to come to Los Angeles during the war years. And in some cases, they went back home. In some cases, they stayed. In some cases, they went into the military and never came home.
Mm-hmm.
And then some people were able to improve their fortunes so that they were able to take advantage of the easing of the restrictions, the housing restrictions. And this was the beginning of the decline of Central Avenue, which is something that continued into the 50s. It was a long, slow decline, but eventually the jazz action moved west to West Adams and Western Avenue. Central Avenue was no longer what it was.
Yeah, I think that's completely true. And yeah, the restrictive housing covenants that I mentioned that were so sort of crucial to bounding in African Americans in particular neighborhoods were declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in 1948. And like anything, it's not like that was waving a magic wand, but it did take away one of the mechanisms that had really kept residential racial segregation in place in LA. So that was definitely a big component. And also another large component was the economic impact of the end of the war and demobilization. So I mentioned like one of the things in Bronzeville was this idea of the prosperous ghetto, which is people had work though, and they were making decent money at these jobs. But when the war ended and we demobilized, usually the first people laid off from those factories were African American. And so it really impacted also the economic situation for a lot of people, which, yeah, contributed, like you said, to some of them leaving Los Angeles.
Teddy Edwards used to say that after World War II, in his words, the bottom dropped out of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
The musicians were scrambling to find work. And on the hope, on the promise of a job anywhere else, they would take off at the drop of a hat. In the case of the Howard McGee Sextet, which was the first resident bebop band on the West Coast, in December of 1945, they went up to Oakland. And I don't know that Oakland was any great jazz mecca, but there was a job. And seemingly their run on in the Hollywood Boulevard clubs was coming to an end. So they took any job they could get. Prophetically, Teddy's father, who was a circus performer, had written him a letter in the fall of 1945 advising his son, get out of California. Quote, California ain't never been no good for an artist, unquote.
Oh my God, I've never heard that. That's amazing. Yeah, it's also, if you look at the Japanese American side of the equation, I think it's important to note, like, that first 10 years after the war, people will refer to it as it's a time of a transition or something. And it's Tetsuden Kashima said, no, that's a time of crisis. When people came back from camp and just trying to get reestablished, trying to find any kind of work. And it really changed the community. Like before the war, a large majority of the Japanese American community worked in the produce business, or they worked in their own small businesses. So they're mostly working kind of in an ethnic economy. And after the war, that economy was destroyed. And so they came back, and at that point, 70% of them are working for white folks. So it completely changed the sort of sense of self-reliance, I guess you would say, before the war, in terms of economically, they had their own businesses, or they were, able to sort of weather the Great Depression quite well within this ethnic economy. And then they became very financially dependent for their jobs on folks who were not part of the Japanese American community. And it really sort of changed the work experience and the life experience. And then, you also see, as time goes on, the same situation you were describing for African Americans is moving out, because now you could. And you see the same thing for Japanese Americans. So you see moving into new neighborhoods that wouldn't used to have accepted Japanese Americans living there. And then that also changes their relationship to Little Tokyo, right? So then you get a situation of Little Tokyo over the 1960s and 1970s is struggling with not being as central to the Japanese American community, and starts to try to figure out, well, how do we keep people coming here?
Well, I think in the case of the Japanese Americans, they went through a similar transition to the Black Americans in Southern California, and that is they decentralized and they moved out. There were other areas for them there was Gardena, there was Lawndale. Not that some of them weren't already in these areas prior to World War II, but West Los Angeles along Sawtell. There's some very old Japanese American owned homes, a lot of them along there. So there were other enclaves for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the interesting things is that you can see, one of the things I talk about a lot in Bronzeville is the interactions between African Americans and Japanese Americans when they are coming back. And the fact that there's both tensions, but there's also this very conscious effort to overcome those tensions. And it's interesting to see as you follow things out into the 1950s and 60s, how frequently both of these communities of people, as they're moving to different locations, are moving to those different locations together. Like they're maintaining these sort of connections in different places. So, you know, Crenshaw. And then later on, it's Gardena, but there's also sort of tensions there around the Holly Park neighborhood then. So there's an incredible historical linkage between these two communities, historical and geographical, that's been central to shaping, you know, the city of LA for most of the 20th century, but oftentimes it's not really talked about that way. It's sort of, you know, people look at these two communities separately and don't always put them into the relationship that they actually were in to each other.
Well, you know, you can see that overlap, that cultural ethnic overlap in the LA city high schools. Schools like Dorsey, where the white population eventually left the area, leaving it to increasing numbers of Black families and therefore Black students. But there was always a Japanese American profile in these schools. So yes, both communities were living cheek by jowl. I've got a question, Hillary, and that is, I'd like you to tell the audience how you got on this trail. Because this, I know for me, is what I would call a magnificent obsession. And you with your doctorate, it had to be the same thing.
That's amazing. I don't know. I always make this joke that Little Tokyo ate my dissertation because it was originally not supposed to even be on Little Tokyo. Well, actually, Little Tokyo was supposed to be a chapter. And what happened was that I found so many incredibly compelling stories and amazing people in doing the research there that it just kept growing and growing and growing. And then the whole dissertation was on Little Tokyo. So yeah, I guess magnificent obsession would work as well. I think, I'm looking at the clock, I'm thinking that we have to turn it over for one more musical interlude from the Ron Kobayashi Band. And then I believe, if I'm correct, we are coming back to do a Q&A after that's over. I hope
it was fun.
Yes, I know. I love seeing you, Kirk. Hi.
All right, again, my name is Ron Kobayashi, and we are, again, so honored to do this tribute to Charlie Parker, a hero to every jazz musician on the planet.
My name is Al Williams, and I'm from San Pedro, California.
I'm Henry Franklin from Los Angeles, California.
I'm Nolan Shaheed from Pasadena, California.
I'm Joshua Christian Childress from Torrance, California.
And this is going to feature everybody. It's a jam, and it's called Progressivity, original composition.
Huge. Is that too loud? Huge. Huge round of applause for Ron Kobayashi Band, and thank you for bringing us home with Progressivity. And thank you, Ron, for composing these numbers, especially for us, honoring Miles Davis and Charlie Parker. Now, for 5 years, Ron served as the musical director for the Hollywood Diversity Awards, where stars like Chris Rock and George Lopez were honored. A couple of notes, okay? We know there was some lag in the technology with the videos not playing in some locations, but when it all airs on YouTube, I think officially everything should be there properly. Look at the comments section on YouTube. Ron Kobayashi named all of the artists, all of the men and the people playing. So he gives a great shout out to his band. And once again, just tremendous. Ron has to go do a gig, so he can't do the Q&A, but he's a fantastic artist. And I'm personally, thankful for his contribution, as I'm sure you are. So another round of applause to the jazz that we're talking about, this jazz. And now it's time for the Q&A. And I'm sorry for rocking my camera. It's like I'm at a stadium. Okay, we'd like to bring back all of our guests. I'm sorry, not all of our guests. We have some specific guest members for our Q&A. We're going to have with us Hillary Jenks. Round of applause for Hillary. Kirk Silsbee. Yeah. Kirk is back with us. And we have Robert Shoji, who's going to rock us. They're going to thrall us with their acumen and their passion regarding Bronzeville, regarding jazz, and regarding all of these great people. And I'm going to go to my notes. How you guys doing, first of all?
Great.
Good. We're doing good.
You're doing good? Okay. Sorry. Thank you for being here, of course. And I'm supposed to have the questions. I'm going to check my little phone real quick, okay? And I'm going to throw out questions, and anybody who wants to jump in, I'm not in charge of anything, just sharing the Okay, I am the least knowledgeable person here. Okay. One of the first questions I have is a question for the historians. Is there a recording of the Charlie Parker and Miles Davis at the Finale Club? And if there is, who made it?
There's a bootleg recording of about 5 titles that are purportedly from the Finale Club, and I believe they are. They certainly sound like bootleg recordings from that time. But other than that, that's the only record, the only audio record of Charlie Parker at the Finale.
Where could someone find them? I mean, as a novice or as a civilian, where can someone find those bootleg?
Yeah, maybe I can add. I actually I have the CD, and here it is.
Thank you.
It's I guess considered a bootleg, but if you go out there and do a search for it, you can find it. I mean, that's where I found my copy. I think I got it off of eBay. Okay. But it is a bootleg copy, and like Kirk said, it's purported to be at the Finale, but you can actually hear somebody on one of the tracks, talk about the location. So I'm pretty sure it is from the Finale.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well,
here's an intriguing footnote to that.
Yes.
I got to know Foster Johnson at the end of his life. I interviewed him.
Wow.
And I formally interviewed him, but I spent time around him.
Got it.
One of the things I asked him was, were there any recordings that came out of that experience? And he said, yes. He said, I had a stack of 12-inch acetates. And I said, okay, Foster, what happened to those? Where are they? And he got this faraway look in his eye. He said, well, probably went to a brother-in-law of one of my divorced wives.
Oh. Wow.
And that's as much as he could tell me.
Okay.
But I'm thinking that these broadcasts that he was part of over station KPAS were the source of these.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Because radio shows were often transcribed to acetates so they could be played again.
Thank you for that bit of phenomenal trivia. And
But nobody's ever found them.
yeah, right, exactly. Okay, I have another question, and please allow me to consult my little device here. Okay, question for any of the historians. Didn't Miles Davis get deeply into the struggle against apartheid in South Africa?
No.
No.
Just clear no, Kirk.
No. He never performed any benefits. He never made any public statements that I know of.
Okay.
He may have given some money, and of course, he hated all things racism.
For sure.
But to my knowledge, he never took a significant public stand about South African apartheid.
Okay.
Probably, I'm guessing, he felt he had enough to deal with here in America.
American apartheid. Okay. All right. All right. Another question. Rob, can you tell us some more about your film? We're running close on short on time, but we wanted to hear a bit more about your film.
Yeah, sure. No, so I made this short film called The Finale Club because a few years ago there was a project that was done by Visual Communications by a group called Form Follows Function, and they mentioned that Miles Davis and Charlie Parker played in Little Tokyo. Now I'm a huge jazz fan, and I think I know the history of Little Tokyo pretty well, and I had never heard this. So with a couple of internet searches, I found out that in fact this was true. So that is basically why I made the film. Again, it was made for Visual Communications, their digital histories program. And so for me, kind of the combination of this, internment camp, Japanese forced to leave Little Tokyo, Miles and Charlie Parker coming in to play at the Finale Club. I mean, for me, it was like a no-brainer that I had to, document the story. And again, Hillary and Kirk both participated in the short film, and they're the ones that really know deeply about the history of what happened. So that's a little bit about the film. But thanks for asking.
Most welcome, and thank you for sharing. And I think we're close to the time, and I have a bit more to say just to wrap it up. Like if I can just say personally, thank you guys, thank you all for your contributions. And it's just this part of American history. Sometimes it's hard to hear. It's hard to digest. The struggle, the cruelty, and the beauty that comes out of such pain. But people that document it, so that it doesn't pass like a chapter in American history that no one knows about. There's so many chapters that just omission, just redacted, and so it's good to have all of the pieces and as many as you can about these intimate moments. And I love this handover between the Japanese community and the African American community, both oppressed people at the time, dealing with forces bigger than themselves and trying to navigate their humanity during those moments, and civility and I would imagine sanity. So, really, I have a bad day in traffic. I'm raging on all five. So imagine a whole bad life for traffic. So thank you so much. And I will now go back to my script. Thank you again for taking the time to join us this afternoon. There are so many people that had a hand in putting together this event. Please take a moment as we share our appreciation for their contributions and check out our website to learn more about LTHS.
Yeah, Little Tokyo Historical Society. So, I'll just add that it was a great honor and a pleasure to work with the Little Tokyo Historical Society and the committee to put this program on. So, and then thanks to you, Alimi, also.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hillary?
Oh, thank you, Alimi, for being such a wonderful host. And
not to me. I just want to know if you wanted to say something, not to say me, but if you wanted to close and say something to the people.
Oh, I just want to say thanks to everyone watching, and just sorry I don't get to see you more often than I do these days, but a special hello to Mike Marassi and Bill Watanabe, two of my favorite people.
Kirk? Sir.
I just want to thank everybody for midwifing my virgin Zoom experience.
Yes!
One of the few virgin experiences left to me.
Okay, good.
And since it's connected with the Finale Club, Bronzeville, Little Tokyo, a trail I've been on since 1973, it's all gravy. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you guys so much. And thank you everyone for watching and who will watch online on days and years to come. And we appreciate you. And thank you for being a part of this moment. And I'm going to hand it off to Joy Yamaguchi. And thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for hanging with us today through all of this. And thank you so much to Alimi and Hillary and Kirk and Robert and Rob and just I said Rob twice. Well, very thankful to you and Ron for all of your contributions to today. We are so grateful to everyone for being a part of this. And on behalf of JANM, I just want to thank you one more time, and I hope that you continue to engage with our programming, engage with Little Tokyo Historical Society, and continue to just be a part of this community. And with that, I'm going to share some final acknowledgments, and then we'll play you out with a little more music. Thank you so much, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.